All right, the next thing we need to look for is producers and consumers. And you may or may not remember this from biology, so we're going to go over it. I'm going to try to do this while climbing up this arroyo. So I'll show you where I'm at. So producers are going to be your plants, like these junipers, yucca, and these other chaparral plants. And this prickly pear cactus. These are going to be your producers, and we call them producers because they produce food for the rest of the ecosystem. Oh goodness, yeah. Adventuring isn't always safe. It's always fun, but it's not always safe. Maybe that's kind of what adds to it. Anyway, producers produce food for the rest of the ecosystem, and they do that by producing glucose in the photosynthesis process. So producers must be photosynthetic, and they're the bottom of the food chain. We call them the bottom of the food chain because it's where chemical energy originates. The producers take radiant energy from the sun, and in the process of photosynthesis, turn it into chemical energy in the form of glucose. And they make other things such as proteins. That's why they need nitrogen and phosphorus, and we'll get to that later. But in the photosynthetic process, they're the foundation, not necessarily the bottom, the foundation of the ecosystem. What eats plants is going to be primary consumers. I'm going to try to find some primary consumers, but this is the chaparral, and it's already 90 degrees and headed toward well over 100. So most of the little mammals have found a place to hide for the day. And there are tons and tons of birds, and as you can hear, tons and tons of insects. Insects are one of our most important primary consumers. They're also secondary consumers. Secondary consumers are those consumers that consume primary consumers. So predators, we usually call them. Now, it can also be omnivores. Now, here in the chaparral, one of the most common omnivores, and that's what I'm looking on the ground for, is ants. Now, ant mounds here look a little different than they do in the DFW area. You've got producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, quaternary and quaternary consumers. Now, quaternary and quaternary are very rare. And the reason why is because of the reduction in energy. Only 10% of the energy, the chemical energy that exists at one trophic level, like producers, right? That's a trophic level. Troph refers to feeding or age. In this case, it's feeding. As you move up trophic level, only 10% of that chemical energy gets passed on. And then, oh, that's a bat falcon right there. Anyway, so at the quaternary and quaternary levels, there's hardly any energy left. So those organisms must be extremely rare. So you're thinking about things such as, leopard seals, great white shark, things like that. These huge apex predators that also eat other huge apex predators. Those organisms are always going to be rare, like tigers. I just want to take a second to show you this. It's beautiful. It's a cactus flower with, there's some kind of little consumer in there. Ecosystems have structural layers. This is something that we're going to look more into and will become very important when we look at permaculture and agricultural techniques like that try to mimic the structural layering of nearly all ecosystems. And even in this ecosystem, because of the lack of water, because of the lack of topsoil, as you can see, it's just rocks and dirt. Because of the lack of topsoil and because of the wind and extreme conditions here, then the tallest vegetation around me is only about 6 or 7 feet high. And so you're thinking, like, how can you have a whole lot of vertical structure when it never gets above like 6, 7 feet high? And so if you look at the ground, you keep your eyes peeled on the ground, you'll start to see it. So these little barrel cacti, right, are growing underneath structurally whatever this cacti is. And then above that, you've got the prickly pear, right, like this one here. And then you've got some of these bushes, I'm not sure what those are, is going to be these mesquite trees. And there's huge amounts of birds here in the chaparral. You'll see these birds using all portions of these structural layers. You're going to see the bat hawks high up. You're going to see the songbirds working in the sort of the middle layers in the top of the mesquites. And then you're going to see like things like doves and roadrunners are, you know, birds that you're going to see on the ground using the lower structural layers. Ah, there it is. All right, you're still here with me in the chaparral biome. Distracted by a butterfly. Because of mankind's involvement through shipping, illegal pet trade, there's half a dozen different reasons why, but sometimes plant species and animal species end up where they're not supposed to be, and they can invade or become invasive and take over an ecosystem. The prickly pear cactus, the reason I tell you that and showed you that species is because the prickly pear cactus is endemic and supposed to be here in the United States, particularly in Texas, and all throughout Mexico and all throughout the Southwest. They are not supposed to be in Australia. They have come into Australia and invaded and become a massive invasive problem there in Australia. Because the prickly pear cactus is not from Australia, it is called an exotic. It's from a different land, from a different place, different ecosystem, different region altogether. So when a species comes into our areas here in Texas, and we have those, we have lots of invasive exotic species. The ones that you would probably know about would be like fire ants, are an invasive exotic species from South America. Wild hogs or wild boar, those are an invasive exotic species from Eurasia. We have a bunch. We have like northern snakehead. We've got loads and loads, hundreds of them. And there will be a project on that. We have invasive plants, invasive animals, and invasive insects like the emerald ash borer or the huntsman spider. Or there's been several new ones coming. There's a new one coming into a new invasive spider in Georgia right now, actually. But invasive, exotic. So when we get species that are both exotic, so they're from somewhere else, and they have no natural predators, they don't get the diseases in the area, or they have no competition, nothing is evolved to compete with them. So that's already kind of a perfect storm, right? So you got an exotic, and then that exotic can outbreed or outcompete the natives. Then it becomes an invasive exotic. And when you've got an invasive exotic, you have a dying ecosystem. And you've got wildlife managers and forest managers, ecosystem managers have to get involved and start removing invasive exotic species or using certain management tools to eliminate those species. One of those management tools, particularly here in the chaparral, is fire. Things are able to invade the chaparral, but may not be able to handle the fire. Everything that is endemic, native to the chaparral, is adapted to fire. So